The most fascinating position group for Syracuse next season is the quarterback room. Who's going to start for Syracuse in 2025? Well, let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in a Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Later on in today's show, we are going to talk about Syracuse basketball because they have some opponents scheduled in their non-con for next season. Two very difficult opponents coming up for the Orange later on this season. We'll talk about that in the show. But first, most of this podcast is going to be Syracuse football related, and we are going to talk about the Syracuse quarterback room and who's going to start for the Orange in 2025. All that and more here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. Now, before we get to everything, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. First of all, before we really get into all the nitty-gritty of this podcast, I want to just say Happy July to everyone. And the reason why I'm saying Happy July is because it's not just that it's July, it's the fact that this is the final full month of no football. Think about it for just a moment. Next month is August. There's football in August, whether it's college or professional. So football is about a month away, give or take. All right. One more full month without football here. And let's get into the game's most important position, quarterback. We all know this. It's really difficult to win without one. And if you don't have one, you're probably not going to be a really good team in that given year. So let's talk about them for Syracuse and the fact that they have a quarterback competition for this upcoming season. For those that do not know, maybe this is your first time following Syracuse football, you're an incoming student, or you need a refresher. Perhaps. Let's get into it. Last year, for those that don't know, Syracuse had a definite, defined starter heading into the season. We knew that it was going to be, barring injury or something catastrophic, it was going to be Ohio State transfer Kyle McCord. And he delivered a record-breaking season for Syracuse football. In fact, he set multiple ACC records, including, I think, most yards in an entire season, breaking Deshaun Watson's record he set at Clemson back in the day. And Syracuse, and Kyle McCord as well, they were trying to get him another year of eligibility. But unfortunately, we will never know whether or not the NCAA would have granted Kyle McCord another year of eligibility because he decided to not go through with the entirety of the process and just enter the NFL draft. He gets picked in the 6th round by the Philadelphia Eagles. So how did Syracuse go about replacing Kyle McCord? Well, the first move was Rickie Collins. And this was back actually when Kyle McCord was technically still fighting and get another year of eligibility. So when Rickie Collins transferred over to Syracuse, I'm going to get to him in just a second, he came to Syracuse with the understanding that there's a possibility that Kyle McCord just gets another year of eligibility from the NCAA. And as a result, Collins would have to sit a year behind McCord. Okay? But anyways, Rickie Collins is 6'2". He's 205 pounds, and he is a redshirt sophomore. He transferred from LSU in December of 2024. For some context on Rickie Collins, he was never going to see the field at LSU, quite frankly. And it might not necessarily be because of him. It's just the circumstances and the fact that only one quarterback can play. Unless you're Tom Landry in the 1960s and 70s trying to do multiple quarterbacks. Usually you're only going with one in a game. But he was a 4-star recruit in 2023, actually out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He sat behind Jaden Daniels in 2023, who won the Heisman Trophy, and Garrett Nussmeier, who I believe was there behind him. And then in 2024, Garrett Nussmeier gets the opportunity to start. So Collins sits behind him. Maybe if you're Rickie Collins, you're thinking that Garrett Nussmeier might decide to leave after 2024, but he doesn't. He doesn't enter the NFL draft. He decides to stay with LSU. He doesn't go in the transfer portal or anything. And as a result, Rickie Collins was not going to be a starting quarterback for LSU until 2026, the earliest. And even then, it's LSU. There's no guarantee he would have been handed the starting job in that season. So he decides to enter the transfer portal. He's an athletic kid. He's mobile. He's got some upside, but only 7 career passing attempts. And he was actually dealing with an injury. So we did not see him during the Syracuse spring game, unfortunately. Now, Collins won the job initially. Fran Brown came out publicly saying that Rickie Collins was his guy and that Rickie Collins was the starting quarterback for Syracuse in 2025. This was back right before the spring game. Collins was named the starting quarterback. He beat out Michael Johnson Jr., who decided to transfer out of the program as a result. And the two true freshmen, which we'll get into, or all the young guys that we'll get into later on here in the show, not true freshmen necessarily, but Luke Carney, Rich Bellin, and Jakhari Williams. However, Fran Brown does not rest. Fran Brown, head coach, is always looking to improve his team. And I applaud that. And so here comes Steve Angeli, 6'3", 205-pound redshirt junior. Angeli became available in the spring transfer portal after losing out on the Notre Dame starting quarterback position to CJ Carr, who we actually talked about on Monday's podcast, talking about some of the tough quarterbacks that Syracuse is going to play this upcoming season. CJ Carr beat out Steve Angeli. So you'd have to figure that CJ Carr, at least in the eyes of Notre Dame, is better. So much so to the point where he was initially connected to Tennessee. When Tennessee was having that whole debacle with Nico Imaliava, a lot of credible reports were out there that were linking the two together, Tennessee and Steve Angeli. It just makes a lot of sense. Tennessee's a big-time program. They need a quarterback. Maybe this is where Steve Angeli can go start, and he'd probably be the starting quarterback for Tennessee had he transferred there. But, and here's the big but here, there was always a big connection with Syracuse football and Steve Angeli. He was offered by Syracuse back in high school. That was a different regime, though. So there's that. But also the fact that Steve Angeli is a New Jersey kid, and his high school coach is actually the brother of Syracuse quarterback coach Nunzio Campanelli. So there was always at least a due diligence phase of this. Like, you know the kid, you might as well see what's out there with him. And lo and behold, there's a visit, and he ends up picking Syracuse. He's got 80 career passing attempts. He's done well in those 80 career passing attempts. And he even had a brief cameo appearance in the college football semifinal against Penn State, where he led Notre Dame to a field goal drive at the end of the half. So who has the edge between Rickie Collins and Steve Angeli? I'd love your thoughts in the comments section below. I mean, who you think is going to start. We've talked about this all off season. Now we're here at the quarterback preview podcast. Who do you think is going to start for Syracuse in 2025? To me, both have a strong case. I mean, Rickie Collins, I guess he would have sat behind Kyle McCord, but other than that, he came to Syracuse with the understanding that he was going to get an opportunity to be the starting quarterback. And then there's Steve Angeli. He did not just transfer out of Notre Dame to then sit on the bench at Syracuse. He could have done that at Notre Dame. And the funny thing is that both these quarterbacks have multiple years of eligibility. So odds are if one of them emerges in 2025, the other will likely not be back with Syracuse in 2026, because whoever emerges this season is, unless they decide to transfer out, will be the quarterback in 2026 for the Orange as well, meaning that the other quarterback will not have a chance to start. My guess is that Steve Angeli is going to be the starting quarterback week 1 against Tennessee, but I cannot stress enough that this is a quarterback competition and that Fran Brown is ultimately going to choose the quarterback he believes is going to give his team the best chance to win, like he does with every position group. And it might sound like Captain Obvious to say that, oh, he's picking the guy who's going to give him the best chance to win. That's not necessarily always how it works in college. Sometimes you want to show loyalty to certain players where you want to give them a shot to start, even though they might not necessarily be the best in a training camp battle. You want to maybe go with the younger kid and see what he's got. With Fran Brown, doesn't seem like that's the case. He's going to play whoever is the best and go from there. And as far as the leash, how long each quarterback has when they get in, I guess for whoever the starter is, I think no matter what happens against Tennessee, if let's say Steve Angeli is the starting quarterback, he struggles week 1 against Tennessee, he's still going to be the starting quarterback in week 2 against UConn. It would have to be such a horrific performance or an injury, and that's it. Other than that, the starting quarterback in week 1 is probably going to get enough of a leash to start in week 2. But week 2 is against UConn. If whoever starts in week 1 doesn't play well, and then in the first half struggles against UConn, I think that's the first opportunity we could see a potential quarterback change. Now, I should note that if this nightmare scenario occurs, Syracuse is not going to make a bowl. But chances are this will not occur, and they will be able to get decent quarterback play this upcoming season. Neither of them have a lot of experience. They've been in college, but 87 career passing attempts combined with Steve Angeli and Rickie Collins. Having said that, I do think that Syracuse will get capable quarterback play. The odds that either can replicate Kyle McCord's season a year ago is extremely low, but they don't need Kyle McCord quarterback play to make a bowl. They definitely need above average, but they don't need Kyle McCord quarterback play to be a bowl team in 2025. What are your thoughts? Comment in the comment section below your expectations for either one of these quarterbacks in 2025, because coming up, we'll talk about the guys behind them. There are 3 young quarterbacks to keep an eye on for Syracuse football. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following along the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling, right? Perhaps you're at the ballpark with a few of your buddies, and it's really fun in the beginning of baseball games, but then you got to get to the middle innings, 4, 5, and 6. There starts to be some pitching changes. Maybe it's a close game. Well, that's where FanDuel could come in with same-game parlays. Who do you think is going to win at a certain point in the game? How many runs? Who's going to get a hit? Et cetera, et cetera. And guess what? If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up because new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we still got plenty more to talk about here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse, right? We're going to shift gears and talk about basketball later on in the show with Syracuse and its non-conference schedule update. And in just a moment, we're going to discuss some of the young quarterbacks on Syracuse's roster behind the 2 frontrunners to be Syracuse's starting quarterback in 2025, whether it's Steve Angeli from Notre Dame or Rickie Collins from LSU. But before we get to the remainder of the show, I just want to shout out all of you who continue to like and subscribe to Locked On Syracuse each and every day. You all are truly the best. It means a ton. Thank you all so much. And hey, you've already made it this far in the podcast. So if you haven't done so already, feel free to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. It's completely free and it helps the channel grow to reach all Syracuse Orange fans. Let's get into the young quarterbacks on Syracuse football's roster. All right. We're going to talk about 3 of these guys. They're the 3 most important, in my opinion. Syracuse technically has more quarterbacks on its roster, but they have 105 players total on the roster. We cannot get into 105 different players here on this podcast. We do not have all the time in the world, unfortunately. But there are 3 quarterbacks that are worth monitoring as potential future options for Syracuse in the coming years. But I do not anticipate any of the three players playing this upcoming season unless there's significant underperformance, there is significant injuries, or, and this didn't apply to last year, but a potential bowl game. Now, the reason why I say it doesn't apply to last year is because there was a bowl game last season. They played in the Holiday Bowl and they beat Washington State in it for its 10th win, but Kyle McCord played in that bowl game. In fact, he played the entirety of the game. But in theory, in practice, a bowl game is just fun. It's a last time to see your team in that college football season. And so if you want to play young guys instead of going for that extra win, you can technically do so. I don't know if Fran Brown would do that necessarily, but I do think it's possible he could play a young guy in the bowl game. I guess we'll just see how the season goes. Or maybe if it's in the middle of the transfer portal again, someone transfers out, you get the idea. But for the most part, I don't expect to see any of these guys in the regular season. Let's talk about Jakhari Williams. He's the first one. He's the oldest of the three players we're going to mention here. 6'2", 200-pound redshirt freshman, a 2024 three-star recruit from Georgia. He was actually a Dino Babers recruit. For those that don't know, Dino Babers was the previous head coach for Syracuse football, but Fran Brown was able to keep the commitment of Jakhari Williams on signing day. It's not easy as a new head coach to keep a recruit at a certain school, because if you think about it this way, right? You're 17, 18 years old making this decision on where you're going to spend your future. And yeah, there is the transfer portal, but at least for a year, you've built a relationship with that head coach in all likelihood, or at least a positive one, or at least with some member of the coaching staff. That coach is probably gone when you change new coaches, whether it's an assistant or the head coach. So Fran Brown was able to keep a guy like Jakhari Williams. He did not make any appearances last season, hence why he kept his another year of eligibility. He's a mobile quarterback. He's got some athleticism, but he does need to work on his accuracy. That's the main part of his game that he has to develop. He's got decent size for what it's worth as well at 6'2", 200 pounds. I'd be curious to see what happens with Jakhari Williams, not necessarily this year, but next year, because I'll be honest, I was on this podcast saying I am predicting that Jakhari Williams will enter the transfer portal because I did not see a path to playing time for him in 2025. And in 2026, if all goes according to plan, one of Steve Angeli or Rickie is going to be the starting quarterback there. And if neither of them are, would they just give the job to Jakhari Williams, or would they go out in the transfer portal again, or give the job to one of the two guys that we're going to talk about in just a moment? So I thought Jakhari Williams would leave this offseason. He decided to stick around. More power to him. We're happy to have him here on the team, but I'm very curious to see what his future is. I don't know if it's going to be with Syracuse football in the long term, but at least for this season, Jakhari Williams is on Syracuse football's roster. Then you got Luke Carney and Rich Bellin. These are two true freshmen kids. You got Luke Carney first at 6'2", 205 pounds. He is a 2025 three-star recruit out of Texas. He played at a small private school there. Very athletic quarterback who also completed over 75% of his passes last season, actually 76% to be exact. And then you got Rich Bellin at 6 foot, 185 pounds, former track and field athlete out of New York, a three-star recruit. He's not the biggest of quarterbacks, not the greatest size in the world, so he's going to need to rely on that athleticism to really make a lot of plays at the next level. But here's the deal. You can loop Jakhari Williams also into this conversation, but I highly, highly doubt we see any of the true freshmen at quarterback play for Syracuse in 2025. And it's nothing against them. It's just that there's a quarterback competition. So those are your top two quarterbacks. And then Jakhari Williams is a year older. So there's a battle, I guess, for the third string quarterback job. I don't see either of these guys playing, and I don't think it's fair to necessarily give an opinion on who's better between Rich Bellin and Luke Carney. I just want to see how it develops. The best case scenario, though, for Syracuse football is one of two things. You get really good quarterback play this season from one of Steve Angeli or Rickie. And because of that, because they have multiple years of eligibility, they decide to stick around for 2026. Maybe even 2027. I believe it's Rickie Collins who has technically 3 years of eligibility. But for all intents and purposes, let's just say best case scenario, one of the two front runner quarterbacks is going to be good for Syracuse in 2025, and he's good for Syracuse again for 2026. Then in 2027, Cuse can pass the baton to one of Luke Carney or Rich Bell. Or Jakhari Williams, if he sticks around. One of those young guys, right? The alternative is, well, another best case scenario is one of the quarterbacks has a great year in 2025. They decide to leave the program, whether it's the portal or the NFL draft, because technically both would be eligible for the NFL draft if they want. They'd be out of high school for 3 years at minimum. And, well, you could turn to one of the young guys for 2026 if you have faith in them. But those are some of the other quarterbacks to keep an eye on as potential future options for Syracuse football that are in-house. You got Jakhari Williams, a redshirt freshman, and you got two true freshmen in Luke Carney and Rich Bellin. Do you think that any of these quarterbacks will one day be the starting quarterback for Syracuse football? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Now, coming up, no more football talk here on this podcast. Don't worry, we're not going to get rid of football talk entirely. But no more on this podcast for today. We're going to talk about Syracuse basketball and its non-conference schedule for next season. Oh, it ain't easy. Stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Let's talk some Syracuse basketball. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the background behind me. No football background now. It is the basketball background. And well, if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite audio platform, I'm telling you right now, we are going to discuss some Syracuse basketball and its non-conference schedule, specifically the games in Vegas. So there was news earlier today, Tuesday, July 1st. Here's the background behind this news before we actually get to it. Syracuse, for well over a year, was set to play in the Vegas Players Era NIL tournament. This is a brand new tournament that started last season with a lot less teams. I think it was either 4 or 8. This year it's 16, I want to say. But regardless, each participating team in this Vegas Era tournament that's going to take place at the end of November is gifted $1 million just for showing up in NIL. $1 million just to show up and play a couple of basketball games. Isn't that pretty cool, right? Then, if you win the tournament, your team gets a bonus of another $1 million. Hence why this is a Players Era NIL tournament. And we now know who Syracuse will play in its first 2 games of said tournament. And odds are this was going to be a tough draw because we were kind of talking about it here on this podcast. We haven't really discussed it in a while, but the last time we talked about it, it was the fact of the ACC, shedding 2 conference games so that every team could add 2 more non-conference games to help them make the tournament or whatever. And one of the things we brought up was, hey, they're playing in this Vegas Era tournament, and they're going to be playing some good teams, like it or not. The hope was that they would draw one of, I guess, the quote-unquote easier teams, but there was really no easy team that they could draw. The draw is not good. I'll be honest with you. I mean, their first 2 opponents, you got Houston on November 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Houston, the team that was just in the national title game. And then Kansas on November 25th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. I know Kansas kind of had a down year last season. Their down year was still a middle seed in the NCAA tournament. That's their down year. Okay, Syracuse down years have been well outside of the tournament. Kansas down year is still safely in the tournament, but you're just not as dominant as what you're normally. Both are easily preseason top 25 teams. depending on where you look, you might find Houston as the number 1 team in the nation on Bart Torvik rankings. And Kansas is top 15 in the country. Again, Syracuse was going to play tough games in the Vegas era tournament. There's Alabama, there's Oregon, there's St. John's, there's Baylor, there's San Diego State. So many good teams. But they got Kansas and Houston. I was hoping that they would draw a UNLV maybe or a Rutgers, at least for one of these games. Now, the third opponent is technically to be determined, right? You got to see how the first 2 games shake out before you play that third game. I do believe that everyone will play a third game. I have to look more into it, but I do believe everyone will play a third game in the Vegas era tournament. It's just who's going to play in the final, who's going to play in the third place game, and what are they just the fill-in games for a schedule. Still matter. Still definitely matter for net rankings and top 25 rankings. But that's just, we don't know the third opponent yet. We have to see how Syracuse does in its first 2, as well as who Syracuse or how the other teams do in the tournament before we can figure out who they're going to play. We'll talk more about Houston and Kansas on Friday in a Poll Friday when we discuss how Syracuse is going to do. But my takeaway is, and maybe you feel differently, maybe you feel confident about it, but I don't feel confident about it. Houston and Kansas? All right. Okay. You want to be the best, you got to beat the best, right? Also, Syracuse is going to be in Vegas before the Players Era tournament because they are going to play St. Joseph's in a non-conference game. Syracuse actually nearly played St. Joseph's a year ago in the Legends Classic tournament in Brooklyn. Remember that? Syracuse, they played Texas in the first game. They lost. And myself and many others expected that St. Joseph's would lose to Texas Tech. But, there's this thing called upsets that can happen in college sports. And St. Joseph's upset Texas Tech. And so as a result, Syracuse had to play Texas Tech after going 0-1, which if they had gone 1-0, you would have thought that they would play Texas Tech in the final. But instead, they played Texas Tech. Texas plays St. Joseph's. I think Texas won that game, and they won the Legends Classic. But the 2 nearly played last year. I wonder if that has any sort of bearing on what happened for this season as far as scheduling the 2. But they're going to play St. Joseph's before the Vegas era tournament. So they'll be out west beforehand. And you know what? If St. Joseph's can pull off an upset against Texas Tech last year, a really good Texas Tech team, probably going to be really good again with JT Toppin, then why can't Syracuse pull off an upset, right? Is it really that much to ask for, just one? Comment in the comments section below how you think Syracuse will do in the Vegas era tournament. Now, that feels like the perfect segue to talk about what's coming up next here on Locked On Syracuse in the near future. We're going to talk some more basketball tomorrow, okay? And we'll go into football recruiting news as we get to later on in the week, really Thursday, Friday, or not Friday, but Thursday and Saturday is a big day. But tomorrow, Syracuse basketball, I want to do a position preview. Let's talk about some of the wings. Let's talk about the shooting guards and small forwards for Syracuse basketball next season. So that's what's coming up next on Locked On Syracuse. And thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. Now for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Portal Show with football recruiting expert Brian Smith, who's got the latest rumors and signings each and every day. And you can be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the Portal Podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I will see you all again soon.